everyone and welcome. It's Karen. I'm so glad you joined me today for this video. It's a bit of a hodgepodge of ideas in here, but for the most part I am using these background dies and just trying to find a few more creative ways to use them in different ways because they are such an investment for us, but they also are beautiful, and I do think we could probably be getting more out of these than we do. So I hope these ideas will give you a little bit of inspiration. And all the supplies are listed in the description box below. So my first suggestion is to try to combine your dies. In this case, I have that holographic rectangle is from the Lots of Rectangles die set, and I've placed that over the leaf burst rectangle frame and glued it in place and then just cut out the leafy frame so that I've got these rectangles now, and I'm putting them on this old colored up piece of background that I've had forever, and so I'm quite happy to use that. But I'm just arranging them now, trying to figure out how they'll all fit onto that and what the order of them should be. So I've glued them all down now and trimmed the edges. Now I decided to use this etched pansy die. If you don't want to see the Copic coloring on this, just skip ahead to about the 6-minute and 7-second mark and you'll skip the whole pansy part. But you can see I'm using these Copic markers. I've Googled the flower. I'm using that B24 on the inside and just flicking on some color there. I've got that Googled image sitting on my desk in front of me, and I just sort of follow that. Here I'm using B12. I am going around that blue, the darker blue, but leaving a white border because on the flower itself there is usually that little white border, so I'm just trying to get the line right here. So then once I've got that done, then I'm going to take this B41 and I'm actually just flicking it. I'm starting where the B12 was, because that will help these colors to blend, and then I flick it up and out. I'm doing this on Nina Solar Crest 80-pound cardstock, so that will help the colors to blend in the fibers of the paper. And then here I'm doing a tip-to-tip technique. So you use the lighter colored marker and you just pick up some of the darker ink from the slightly darker shade. And then I'm flicking that on, starting from the beginning where the color meets with the white, and just again flicking up and out. It's pretty simple coloring. Now for these petals, I'm using the B12 again on the very base of the petals, and then I switch to the B41 and I'm flicking that out. And you can see I'm really scribbling, you guys. I don't spend a lot of time on this. And then I'm going to do that same flicking technique again and just darken it up a little bit more. And it also darkens, because you're flicking up and out, it darkens the outer petals a little. Now I decided that the inside needed to be darker, so I'm going back over that with the B24. But I wasn't very happy with that. It still didn't look dark enough, so I came in with this B26, and that seemed to help quite a bit. So that's just going on the inside of those darker blue areas. Now that's yellow 8 for the big piece of the center, and then for the other ones I did yellow 02. Okay, I like to shape my pansies, or the flowers usually when I do them, and I have these ball styluses. So on the back of the petals, I'm just pushing in, doing this on an old mouse pad, and I am just pushing along the edges to help curl them under. And then when you, so for all of these it's on the back side, and now with this bigger one, I'm doing it on the front side. And I'm sort of going around that center. It's a little tricky because it's missing its centerpiece, but I'm just trying to get it to shape so that it goes inward in the center and out. So you get that sort of S-shaped petal. So here's how I put the centers together. I am using Scotch tape or cellophane tape, depending on where you live in the world. And I just put that on the back, and then I can position these die cut pieces back in, and they will stick to that tape. And there are the little ones. Now I was missing one of those centerpieces, that long skinny piece. I do not know where that went. but it didn't seem to bother me too much. And then I glue these extra petals on. And once they're glued, I like to push the whole center down with the ball stylus again. It just sort of helps glue, make sure the tape and the glue are working really well, and it reshapes it a bit. Now, if you don't have this ball stylus, you can do the same, pretty much the same thing with a pencil or a paintbrush. I've got a thin brush, and you can see I am just curling those petals under there. So, and I'm using a fair bit of force to do that. But I just go around and shape each petal, and then for the center you can start to just sort of push it down and fold the petals up a bit so that you get that same sort of S-shaped curve to all the petals. So there you go, it's a bit of a shaped pansy. So off camera I did a couple more of those pansies, and I've glued them all down now. I have die cut that hello from the same silver holographic cardstock and did a white shadow layer for it. So there's a different way of using that frame. Here's another example. That's the one on the bottom is the Doodle Flower Cover Plate 1. That's it there. And I glued that down to a piece of white cardstock. Once that was glued down, I then cut it with this paper piece rectangle die set. And then I inked up each of those pieces after I had cut them out. Now that is the white frame that is also cut with that paper piece rectangle, but I chose not to use that. Now you can see on the right, that's it without the doodle plate cover die. I did do a better inking job on the right. I don't like my ink job on the left, but I do like the extra texture that doodle plate gives you. Now I wanted to use this butterfly. It's from the Butterfly Card Creator die set, and it's actually technically a border die, but it's such a pretty butterfly. So to cut it out, this is what I do. I just leave it in position and I trace around the die, and that will give you the perfect cutting line. So hopefully you can see that there, and you just cut along that penciled line. Now I cut 2 of those butterflies, and on the top one I've put this little piece of alcohol inked acetate just to add some color to the wings. And this is a Jennifer McGuire tip on how to give some extra dimension to those butterflies. So I'm just measuring this little strip of acetate to be about the length of the wing, and I'm folding it in half and pressing quite firmly. And then I trim it down so both sides are equal. And then you want to put a piece of double-sided tape over the entire outside of that sort of V-shaped piece of acetate. And then you can remove that backing paper. And so when you go to stick this in, it's kind of a V shape, and the outside of that V is sticky. So you want to tuck that pointy end right down in by the body. I've actually glued the bodies together on these 2. So I'm tucking that in, and now the wings will pop open. So it will close down for mailing, but they pop open for when the card comes out. Okay, now this thanks die I wanted to use, but it just wasn't showing up well enough against that background. So here's my tip when you don't have a shadow layer. I put the die down and I trace around it, and I'm doing this onto vellum, so I did it backwards, but if you did it on white cardstock you wouldn't have to erase the pencil marks. But you just trim around that and you will have the perfect shadow layer every time. So there's the card. I do wish I had put more color onto those sections, but there you have it. Live and learn. But that butterfly does pop up. He does stand up quite nicely, and will go down flat for mailing. Now this was another card I had previously posted, but it's also using 2 dies. So the outside is the curved or the nested curved rectangles, and that inside is the spring floral frame. And so what I did is I put them together tightly, but you could add a layer of foam in between for a slightly different look, or you could put this floral frame in the front, and that would be a completely different look. Okay, so another thing to do with your cover dies is to use parts of them. So I've got that Doodle Flower cover plate, that's the one on the far left there, under my left hand. And then this is the Flourish Circle die. Now, you could choose to use a circle, a heart, a star, whatever you want, you could use. For this one, I chose the circle because I liked the inside of that doodle cover plate. I glued the circle down and then I carefully trimmed around just under the edge of that circle. And what I was left with was two pieces. So the one on the right is what came out of that, but then I just die cut another one of the circle or the flourish circles and used that outside to cover up where I had previously cut this one out. I hope that makes sense. So I ended up with two for the price of one. So on this one, this is the Protea Slimline Flower stamp set that I've colored it partly in. I didn't color the whole thing. But I'm trying to figure out which part of it I want to use. So I've just taped that cover plate down and I've got my circle die that's slightly smaller than the width of that outside circle. And I'm just tacking that in place so I can cut out my coloring. And again, I'm trying to decide, do I want it flush with that cover plate or do I want to have a bit more dimension? And of course, I made my life difficult and went for more dimension. So here what I've done is I've put some foam tape on the inside of the circle on the back, and in order to add some dimension to the outside edges of this frame, I just cut tiny strips of cardstock, glued them together. I think I did 3 or 4 layers of cardstock, and then I'm just gluing those down to this teeny tiny outside frame. And that just helps hold everything up. Underneath that, I've put some Cosmic Shimmer Ultra Sparkle paste around the edges and a few pearls on the inside and added that sentiment, "It's your special day," which I did foil. And those are all from Paper Rose as well. Now for this circle one, I chose to use the Rainbow Poppies paper. I love this paper. And I just thought it would go quite nicely with that. So I've just put some double-sided foam tape on the back, and underneath that flower in the center, it kind of hides an extra little bit of foam tape there. This Celebrate I had made for the previous card, but didn't use it, and I thought that would go quite nicely on the frame. So I've put some glue on the back of that, and I'm just going to tape it down with some low-tack tape, just at the ends, and then I put this under blocks, and it glued beautifully like that with the curved shape. So I was quite happy with that. So there you go. So from that cover plate and the flourish circle, 2 cards, which I think is quite fun, and they're different than if you had used the whole cover plate. So another way to use your background dies is to turn them into shakers. And I think that's fairly obvious. I think a lot of us do that anyway. But sometimes I don't think about that, and so I just thought I would put that in here. I'm actually not going to make a card. I've previously made these other 2. You just want to make a well, and whether it's the entire front of the card or parts of it is your choice. So on this paper piece rectangle, you could cover in some of those and leave others as a shaker. Okay, so on to the next idea, which is to emboss your dies. In this one, I've inked up that paper. I'm using the instructions on my die cutting machine. So for me, it's the die that goes down first, then the cardstock, then the rubber mat, and then the texture plate that goes on top. And so when you emboss this, you get this really deep impression. It's really quite pretty because it's almost, it almost looks like a pillow in some ways. It just puffs up in parts and goes down in the others. And you could put a die cut piece on top of that. Here's another idea. You can use your dies as a stencil. So here I've put some pixie spray on the back and I've done some ink blending. And so when you remove that stencil, it's flush as opposed to the one on the right, which is the embossed one, and you can see the depth of that. So 2 totally different looks. But where I use this die as a stencil, I now have this piece, which I ended up gluing onto this one because it was all inked up with the same colors, and I quite like that. So keep that in mind. You may get a 3 for 1. So here are the cards. I've just done a bit of ink blending on the edges and a bit of stenciling with embossing paste. And look at the well, I don't know if you can see it very well, but it really does look nice when it's all embossed, because it's almost like a die cut inlay technique with puffiness, I think. So it's just another idea to keep in your little bag of tricks, is what I would say, I think. Now, this is a stenciled one, and I went back over that with some Cosmic Shimmer Ultra Sparkle paste, and it really brought out a lot of shine. My paste was drying up terribly, so I was happy to use that up, but I really like how this card turned out. And those are the little etched butterflies that I've colored in there. So 2 more cards with a slightly different technique on both of those. Okay, here's another idea. You can always change your card fold. In this case, I've made a gatefold card. So I've cut a piece of cardstock that is 8 3/4 inches wide by 5.5 tall. And I've scored it in a 2 1/4 inches in from each end. Now, I did not get mine quite right, but it's not going to matter. You'll see in a minute. So then that cover plate die, I just cut right down the middle. Now, here's that circle flourish. I had all these extra flourishes left over, and I thought maybe I would use those. So I've just glued it onto some vellum and then trimmed the vellum just around this circle. Here I'm positioning it onto the front of my card. I'm using low-tack tape on the right side because it's the left side I want to glue down, but I wasn't sure how far to go on the circle, so this was the easiest way to do that. So I'm just putting glue on whatever is left on this side and on the flourishes. And then when you close it up, the glue will stick down onto that left-hand side. And I just held it there for a minute or so just to let that glue really set up. And then I'm just adding in some die cut pieces, and these are from the Betty's Garden die cut set. And I just thought they went so well with all that flourish and the background die. And I put a feel better soon sentiment on that one. So those are a few ideas for you. I know there's lots more, but I just thought I would put a few out there and hopefully give you a little bit of inspiration. So thank you for joining me, everybody. I hope you're having a great day.